they told her without blinking. "This lounge is for first class only." Her reply? A silent lift of the ticket already in her hand, clearly marked 1A. But they didn't look at the ticket. They looked at her skin, her poise, her quiet, and decided none of it belonged. Within minutes, security was summoned, not for someone yelling, not for someone causing trouble, but for a black woman standing still. Not disruptive, just present. And that was enough. "Probably using a promo seat," someone muttered. "Might be one of those diversity programs." A flight attendant laughed. Another passenger smirked. No one saw her as who she truly was. And that was their first mistake. Because the woman they tried to push aside didn't just board that plane. She owned the rights to the sky it flew through. But she said nothing. Not yet. Because this wasn't revenge. It was a test. And every look, every whisper, every skipped service was being recorded in silence sharper than any lawsuit. So now the question isn't what happened to her. It's what happens to the system when it realizes she's the one holding the pen that rewrites it. If that opening shook you, stay close. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell us, where are you watching from? And when did you realize she wasn't just a passenger? Amara Layton arrived at JFK Terminal 7 with the quiet elegance of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Her steps were smooth, deliberate, echoing faintly beneath the arched glass ceiling as the late morning sun poured down through the skylights. Her outfit, a deep emerald green trench coat over a minimalist silk jumpsuit, turned heads, but not for its loudness. It was the kind of wealth that whispered, the kind that didn't ask for permission. And yet, the moment she reached the check-in line for first class, the shift happened. Not in the room, in the eyes. The woman at the counter, Rachel, according to the glinting gold name tag, offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, a little too loudly. "Economy is over at Delta side, Concourse B. You're on the wrong side of the terminal." She hadn't scanned anything, hadn't looked at Amara's ID, just looked at Amara. Amara's eyes flickered for a moment. She was used to this. The trained smile, the gentle redirect, the assumption, always sitting quietly beneath the surface. "You don't belong here." "Actually," she replied, voice even, "I believe this is the Skylux first-class check-in." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise her eyebrows. But something in her tone hinted that she knew more than she let on. Rachel's eyes narrowed, just briefly, before she straightened. "Of course," she said quickly. "May I see your ID and boarding pass?" Amara handed over her passport and digital pass with the casual precision of someone who knew every step of the process. Rachel took them, scanned the barcode, and froze. Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to Amara. "Just one moment, please," she said. Her fingers tapped the keyboard in a staccato rhythm, hesitant, then frantic. Then she leaned slightly to her left and whispered into the headset clipped to her ear. "Can I get a supervisor at Checkpoint Alpha? I need a revalidation on a first-class ticket." Possible seating allocation error. Amara heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But she knew. This wasn't about an allocation error. This was about her. Her skin. Her silence. Her refusal to explain why she was here. Rachel didn't look at her again. She simply busied herself with nothing at all until a man in a gray blazer appeared beside her. His name tag read Liam Operations Manager. He didn't smile. He looked at the screen, looked at Amara, then leaned over to Rachel. "It's valid," he said under his breath. "Let her through." Amara's phone buzzed. A subtle notification from her encrypted app. Monitoring status, passive. Stakeholder tracking active. She ignored it. "Sorry for the delay," Rachel said, voice forced. "Just a system hiccup. Happens sometimes." She handed back the documents without eye contact. Amara accepted them, tucked them into her clutch, and offered a small smile that said, "You blinked first." She walked past them, heels clicking, the kind of sound you remembered, not because it was loud, but because it was unapologetic. Behind her, Rachel muttered, "First class, huh?" And Liam replied, maybe a sponsorship. She doesn't look like the usual crowd. Inside the Skylux lounge, everything was muted golds and velvets, the scent of citrus and fresh leather. But the stares remained, subtle, slicing glances. The couple in designer athleisure who paused their conversation when she passed. The concierge who asked to see her invitation twice. Every step she took was a reminder. Your presence is still being reviewed. She sat in a corner chaise, away from the main traffic, her tablet open but untouched. Her mind was already working, not just remembering the words, but the micro-expressions. The delay, the call for the manager. First point of breach recorded. She noted mentally. One of many to come. A family entered, blonde, laughing loud. Their children ran toward the snack bar, untouched, unchecked. No one asked their mother for ID. No one pulled their father aside for confirmation. Amara simply watched, not with anger, with calculation. She sipped her tea slowly. Jasmine, subtle, like her. Then another alert flashed on her private screen. Manager profile, Liam F. Hendricks. Tenure, 7 years. Prior complaints, 3, unsubstantiated. She made a note. Across the lounge, the same Rachel from the counter passed by, eyes scanning, pausing slightly when she noticed Amara comfortably reclined in her seat. Their eyes met. Amara didn't look away. This time, it was Rachel who did. 15 minutes later, a notification came over the lounge speaker. Skylux Flight 1183 to Zurich is now boarding. First-class passengers may proceed to Gate 11. Amara closed her tablet, stood, adjusted her coat. As she walked toward the gate, another hostess scanned her pass. "Have a pleasant flight, MS. Leighton," she said, but her voice hesitated, like she hadn't expected the name on the screen to match the woman in front of her. At the boarding door, Amara was stopped again. A tall man in a navy vest stepped into her path. "Just a quick additional ID check," he said. "Random selection." He smiled, but his eyes told a different story. Amara handed him her documents once more, and he took longer than necessary to examine them. Then he waved her through. "You're good." The woman behind Amara, platinum blonde Louboutin heels, was waved through without so much as a glance. Inside the jet bridge, Amara exhaled slowly. This wasn't the first time she'd had to earn her seat after buying it, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this flight wasn't just another example. This flight was a test, a stage, and they didn't know. The real show hadn't even started. Amara Leighton had barely settled into the cushioned velvet lounge chair when a slim woman in a navy uniform approached her with a practiced smile and a clipboard held a bit too high, as if it were a badge. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, keeping her voice polite but clipped. "We're doing a routine guest verification for Skylux Platinum passengers. Would you mind stepping over to the concierge desk for a quick identity confirmation?" Amara raised an eyebrow slightly, then glanced to her right where an older white man in a crisp blue blazer had just walked in, bypassed the front desk entirely, and been greeted with champagne before even flashing his boarding pass. "Is this verification being done for everyone?" she asked, calm but measured. The woman's smile thinned. "It's random, mum. Just procedure." Amara stood slowly, grace unbothered, and followed her to the polished marble counter, where a younger attendant awaited, typing without looking up. The woman leaned in and whispered something, then turned back to Amara. "It shouldn't take more than a few minutes. Please just have a seat over there while we process your ID again." Amara took a step back and observed, not just them, but the way they orchestrated the delay like it was a song they'd rehearsed before. The man in the blazer who had entered after her was now comfortably reclined with a drink, his shoes off, his phone charging, while she, the woman who'd been seated first, was now waiting on clearance like someone who trespassed. The attendant tapped into the system with unnecessary deliberation, clicking, scrolling, pausing like she was solving an international financial crime instead of confirming a boarding pass that had already been scanned twice. After a moment, the woman muttered to her colleague, "She's clear." But instead of apologizing, she added, "Still, not a bad idea to keep an eye. Sometimes these upgrades get complicated." Amara heard it, of course. She always heard it. These weren't just casual comments. They were micro-signals sent between people who believed their uniforms gave them the right to validate humanity. She returned to her seat in silence, eyes straight ahead, posture regal. Her presence was not performative, it was intrinsic. But to the staff, her calm composure wasn't confidence. It was confusion, misplacement, a mistake that hadn't yet been corrected. 10 minutes later, as boarding neared, a male flight attendant entered the lounge to begin the VIP pre-board greeting. His name tag read Evan. He spotted Amara and paused, doing a double take, then leaned toward the concierge with an expression that said he was trying to be subtle, but didn't care enough to try hard. "Who's that?" he asked, just above a whisper. "She in a campaign or something?" The concierge shrugged, replying without looking up, "No idea. Might be one of those influencer perks. Or maybe her guy paid for the seat." Evan smirked. "Or she won some contest. They're doing that thing again where they raffle off a luxury experience." Amara, not 10 feet away, sat absolutely still. She could hear every word. They weren't even hiding it. They didn't whisper to exclude her. They whispered because they assumed she couldn't be of them. Because people like her only belonged in luxury if it was gifted, sponsored, or borrowed. Never earned. Never owned. A family entered, a tall, sun-kissed couple with a teenage daughter in Ivy League gear. Evan turned immediately to greet them, his tone lifting, his posture changing. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. We're honored to have you flying with us today. Can I offer you a complimentary beverage while you wait?" Amara caught the look he gave the daughter, curious, warm, affirming. She noticed the way the girl looked at her, too, just a flicker of confusion, as if wondering what Amara had done to deserve being here. And still, no one approached her again. No apologies. No offers. No drinks. Just silence and stares, and the heavy presumption that someone had clearly messed up the seating chart. From across the room, Rachel, the check-in agent, reappeared. She spotted Amara again, and this time didn't hide her frown. She leaned in to Evan as he passed. "Still here," she said. "They didn't reroute her?" Evan glanced back at Amara and shrugged. "Must be a glitch." They both laughed. And then the pre-boarding call began. The boarding process had been quick. Too quick. The moment Amara stepped onto the plane, the same flight attendant, Evan, offered a tight smile and a sideways glance that lasted half a second too long. She was escorted to seat 2A near the window, with no champagne offered like the passengers seated ahead of her. The man in 1A had been handed his flute the moment he hung up his blazer. The woman in 2C got hers before even buckling her belt. Amara sat still, watching the exchange of glasses and grins like she was witnessing a club she hadn't been invited to, even though her name had been printed first on the manifest. No one brought her anything. No one asked. Not yet. Not even a "can I get you started with something?" She waited. 10 minutes passed. The overhead bins were closed, safety checks completed, and still nothing. The plane taxied forward, and she remained unseen. Once airborne, Evan returned with the meal cart, moving from row 1 downward. The aromas of roasted vegetables and seared meat floated into the cabin as he handed menus to each guest. He reached row 2, paused for the man in 2C, then looked past Amara entirely. No menu, no eye contact, as if she were an unclaimed coat hanging in the wrong seat. When she finally spoke, her tone was level but pointed. "Excuse me, I believe I didn't receive a menu." Evan blinked, caught in the act of skipping her, then offered a quick, forced chuckle. "Oh, I thought you didn't want a meal. You hadn't said anything when we passed earlier." Amara didn't flinch. "You didn't ask." He paused, as if considering whether to challenge her, then pulled a menu from the back pocket of his apron and handed it over. "We have 2 options today: wild mushroom risotto or lemon herb chicken. Let me know when you're ready." But his tone was no longer neutral. It was slightly clipped, edged with annoyance at being made to correct something he didn't even consider a mistake. 15 minutes later, her tray arrived. The plate was lukewarm, the risotto congealed at the edges, and the bread roll visibly crushed. Evan set it down without comment. "No Ismail. No, enjoy your meal." Just the quiet message that service was being given, not offered. Amara looked at the tray, then at the others. The man in one had a cloth napkin folded into a fan. Hers was crumpled beside the silverware, half tucked into the tray edge. She didn't react. She noted. As the meal progressed, the flight attendants checked on others regularly. Second drinks, more bread, additional sauces. Evan returned to every other seat in her row. When he finally approached Amara again, it was with a bottle of water already opened, condensation dripping down the sides. "Here you go," he said, setting it on her tray. Amara glanced at the cap. "Was this already opened?" Evan shrugged. "I figured you wouldn't mind. It's the last bottle from this cart. Want a straw or something?" Her eyes met his, calm but unreadable. "No," she said. "This is fine." But in her mind, she was already filing it. Small detail. Open bottle. Unequal treatment. Pattern confirmed. Later, as the trays were being cleared, a different flight attendant, a younger woman with hesitant eyes, passed by Amara's seat. She paused, looked at the untouched risotto, and asked, "Was everything okay with your meal?" Amara gave her a tight smile. It was cold. The woman nodded, clearly unsure how to respond, then wheeled the cart away without offering an apology. Across the aisle, the same attendant offered chocolates and dessert wine to the other first-class passengers. None came to Amara. None were offered. Amara leaned slightly against the curved window of seat 2A, the clouds rolling beneath her like a silent ocean. Her half-finished tray cleared without comment. Her phone sat in her lap, the battery icon flashing red, a minor inconvenience made strangely symbolic. She reached for the attendant call button, waited, and when the young female flight attendant appeared, Amara offered a polite smile. "Hi, would it be possible to charge my phone? It's nearly dead." The attendant glanced at the phone, then hesitated, scanning the front row like she needed permission from someone else to say yes. The outlets in first class are reserved for premium tier guests," she said slowly. "Maybe try asking one of the staff in economy to let you use theirs." Amara blinked once, the calm expression on her face freezing for a moment in something colder. "I am in first class," she replied, voice low, unshaken. The attendant flushed slightly, nodding too quickly. "Right, I just meant. It's complicated. Those ports are tied to priority tiers." She stepped back before Amara could speak again, her apology replaced by a kind of hasty retreat. Moments later, a voice from across the aisle broke the hum of the cabin. A middle-aged white man in seat 3B leaned toward Evan, who was preparing a drink order, and asked casually, "Hey, what's her deal?" He gestured toward Amara with a sideways glance, as though asking about a foreign object, not a person. "She a celebrity or something?" Evan smirked, barely hiding his amusement. "Not sure," he said. "Looks like one of those social media types. You know, influencer lifestyle and all that." The man chuckled. "Figures. These days, all you need is a ring light and a pout to land in first class." Evan grinned. "Exactly. She hasn't asked for much, though. Kind of surprising." Their voices weren't hushed. They didn't feel the need. They spoke just loud enough for Amara to hear if she was paying attention. And she was. Amara remained motionless, fingers still resting on her silent phone, now tucked into the seat pocket. She didn't turn her head. She didn't sigh or scoff or react. But inside, the ledger clicked. Another tally. Another entry in a growing list of unspoken offenses. The assumption that she must have leveraged beauty, not brains. That her seat was owed to aesthetics, not earned by inheritance, strategy, or investment. That a black woman, dressed immaculately, flying first class alone, couldn't possibly belong without a story that made her acceptable to them. Fame, pity, or sponsorship. Across the aisle, a different attendant offered the man in 3B a warm towel and fresh sparkling water. When Evan passed by again, he placed a new blanket on the lap of the elderly woman in 1C and adjusted her light with care. Amara received nothing. No towel, no drink, no check-in, just distance. Invisible but deliberate. The same way walls are built, not brick by brick, but by removing warmth one interaction at a time. As Evan returned toward the galley, another passenger entering from the restroom stopped him with a low whisper, gesturing again toward Amara. She's someone I should recognize? Evan shrugged. Maybe. They let all kinds of folks in these days with loyalty programs and sweepstakes. It's not like the old days anymore. They laughed. The joke wasn't clever, but the implication landed. The old days, the good days, the days when first class looked exactly how they wanted it to. White, tailored, predictable. Amara stared forward, the faint reflection of her face on the window merging with the clouds outside. She had heard enough. She wasn't just hearing their words, she was hearing their comfort in speaking them. Their belief that proximity to authority, even if minor, gave them permission to degrade quietly. Power in their eyes came not from wealth or knowledge, but from their familiarity with the system, with the privilege, with each other. And what they saw in Amara was disruption and disruption. Unsettled them. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a leather card holder, fingers grazing over an object she had not yet used. Not yet, but soon. The hum of the engines had long settled into a steady drone as the cabin lights dimmed to a golden glow meant to emulate dusk. Passengers around Amara began reclining, adjusting pillows, closing their eyes with the relaxed entitlement of people who expected comfort and knew it would be delivered. Amara, however, remained upright, hands folded on her lap, eyes trained on the seatback screen in front of her, though it wasn't playing anything. The tension around her hadn't eased since boarding. It had only mutated, growing quieter, more insidious, like mold under polished wood. She sensed the next shift before it arrived. Evan didn't come this time. Instead, it was a man in a navy vest with gold trim and a neatly pressed badge that read Malcolm, lead cabin officer. He crouched politely beside her seat, his voice hushed in a way that suggested discretion, but not respect. "MS. Leighton, I hope everything has been comfortable so far," he began, lips forming the words with the precision of rehearsed civility. She nodded once, cool and composed. "We've received a note from ground operations regarding your ticket," he continued, lowering his voice further. "It's flagged as possibly being part of an anonymous promotional tier. Nothing major, just a back-end discrepancy, could be a system error, but we may need to confirm your payment source." Amara didn't react immediately. She simply tilted her head slightly, examining his expression, measuring whether he actually believed what he was saying. "I purchased my ticket directly through the airline's executive portal," she replied calmly, "under my name, with direct authorization." Malcolm gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure that's the case. Sometimes these promotional seats are assigned last minute through third-party vendors, and the system doesn't update correctly. Happens more than you'd think." She held his gaze. "And does it happen often in first class?" He hesitated. "Not usually." But again, no judgment implied. We just have to verify for audit purposes. Amara's fingers tightened around the armrest, not from fear, but restraint. She knew this move. It was the prelude to a paper trail, designed to document doubt without accusation, to suggest that her presence required a footnote, an exception, a justification. As Malcolm stood and retreated toward the galley, the man across the aisle leaned over to his wife and whispered just loud enough to be heard if you were paying attention. "These diversity initiatives are getting out of hand," he said, lips curling with disdain. "Soon you won't even have to pay to sit up here. Just check a few boxes." The woman chuckled lightly, sipped her wine, and nodded. "It's the optics. That's all anyone cares about now." The man glanced at Amara, unaware or uncaring that she could hear every word. "You can always tell," he added, "right down to the attitude." Amara breathed in slowly, centering herself. The seat had cost her nothing compared to what she was worth. But the toll of being questioned, flagged, and framed under the guise of policy was something else entirely, something every inch of her upbringing had prepared her for, but never made easier. She could feel the script forming in their minds, not the one on paper, the one they wrote silently, with looks and innuendos. The one that said, "She's probably not really supposed to be here. She's playing a role, trying to look the part, gaming the system." It didn't matter that her name had cleared every security threshold, that her ID had matched every manifest, that her payment had gone through a corporate channel few people even knew existed. What mattered was that she didn't look like the system's idea of legitimate, and legitimacy in their world came with a face. It wasn't hers. She turned toward the window again, catching her own reflection in the darkened glass. The irony was sharp. Invisibility and hypervisibility coexisting. She was seen, yes, scrutinized, dissected, categorized, but not acknowledged. They saw a version of her, curated through their prejudice. Not the one that had sat on boards. Not the one with voting rights over regional airspace contracts. Not the one whose silence could shift shareholder meetings. Just a woman with too much poise and too much melanin for their comfort. Behind her, a flight attendant whispered something to Malcolm. He nodded, then opened his tablet and began typing, glancing up once at her row, as though documenting an encounter that hadn't happened yet. As though preparing a version of the story in which she was the anomaly, not a guest, not a stakeholder, but a statistical outlier to be reconciled in post-flight notes. She turned back toward the aisle, her gaze calm but calculating. Something in her eyes had changed, not broken, focused. Amara had just opened her laptop, a sleek graphite device barely thicker than a hardcover book, and begun scrolling through a document encrypted with a double authentication key when she noticed a ripple of discomfort 2 rows behind her. It wasn't loud. It never was. The language of suspicion often whispered instead of shouted. A middle-aged woman with a pearl necklace leaned toward a flight attendant and gestured subtly in Amara's direction, whispering behind the edge of a menu. The attendant's face stiffened slightly, nodded, and disappeared toward the galley. Amara sensed it before it happened. She felt the shift in temperature, in posture, in attention. She had seen this kind of choreography before, the silent relay between perception and protocol. Within minutes, 2 uniformed airline security officers boarded from the front and walked briskly toward her row, stopping just beside her seat with practiced neutrality. "MS. Layton," the taller one said, voice low but firm, "we've received a report from another passenger regarding your electronic device. We'd like to conduct a soft security verification. If you could please collect your items and accompany us to the jet bridge." Amara blinked once, then slowly closed the laptop, her hands precise, movements controlled. "What exactly was reported?" she asked. "Just some concerns about unusual activity," he replied. Vague enough to cover anything, specific enough to imply threat. She stood calmly, her posture unbothered. But every step she took toward the front of the plane was followed by silent eyes, most of them pretending not to stare, all of them calculating. In the narrow space of the jet bridge, a temporary screening station had been assembled, just a collapsible table and 2 chairs, but the setting was deliberate, exposed, transitional, temporary, and inherently unstable, much like the assumption that brought her here. One of the officers motioned for her to take a seat while the other opened a tablet synced to the airline's internal security log. "We appreciate your cooperation," the shorter one said, sounding rehearsed. "We just have a few questions for clearance." Amara remained seated, composed. "Go ahead." He tapped the screen, glanced at a file, and asked, "Have you ever been denied entry into the U.S. or any allied country under a visa restriction?" Her brow arched slightly. "No," he nodded and continued. "Was this ticket purchased by you directly, or by a third-party sponsor or representative?" "By me," she answered evenly, "through a secured corporate account." He looked at her, but his eyes didn't soften. "Is your name listed on the credit source?" "I am the credit source," she replied. There was a pause. He didn't write that down. The next question came from the taller officer, who glanced at her passport again. "Have you traveled internationally in the last 6 months, using alternate identification or documentation linked to a foundation or nonprofit entity?" Amara stared at him for a moment, long enough to make him shift slightly. "Why would that be relevant?" she asked. He cleared his throat. "Sometimes high-value tickets are routed through organizational funds. It's standard to check." "Is that standard for all passengers?" she said flatly, "or just the ones flagged by skin tone?" Neither answered. The air grew dense, not loud, just heavier. The way truth does when it's not denied, only ignored. Another flight attendant stepped into the jet bridge, whispering something to the shorter officer, then stepping back. He looked up from the screen. "We've been informed you were seen operating an encrypted document system during takeoff," he said. "Do you use proprietary software from a third-party government agency?" "No," she replied. "I use private encryption for board-level communications." "Related to what?" "Investment governance," she answered. "Which I assume your system can't verify, because your airline doesn't have clearance." That answer landed like a silent slap. The officers exchanged a glance. Neither asked another question for a long beat. Then, without apology, the taller one said, "Thank you for your patience, Ms. Layton. We'll escort you back now." But Amara didn't move. She remained seated for a moment, eyes fixed on the corridor just beyond the window, where rain streaked faintly down the curved glass. She knew the damage had already been done, not physically, not even reputationally, but structurally. The implication had been logged, the incident recorded. The story, should it need to be spun, had already been half-written. An unidentified passenger raised concern. Minor protocol executed. Passenger complied. No harm done. But the harm wasn't in the action. It was in the framing. In the fact that no one had asked to verify the man in 1A when he opened his phone and began syncing data across 2 devices. Or the woman in 3C who had taken a full 5 minutes to adjust a suspicious-looking battery pack. Only her. Only the black woman in designer wool with too much silence and too much certainty to seem unthreatening. As she stood and followed them back through the jet bridge, the whispers had already begun in the forward galley. A new version of her was being born, one shaped not by fact, but by suggestion, and she knew exactly who was shaping it. Amara stepped back into the cabin with a silence that cut cleaner than confrontation. She didn't look at the flight attendants. She didn't acknowledge the curious eyes peering over seatbacks or the whispers looping like static down the aisle. She simply moved with the steady grace of someone no longer interested in participating in someone else's performance. As she returned to seat 2A, the lead flight attendant, Malcolm, appeared from a galley, his expression neutral, but his presence unmistakably defensive. He approached her aisle and stopped a few feet short, perhaps expecting a confrontation or even an apology. Instead, Amara reached calmly into her bag, pulled out her phone, and unlocked a secure app with a single biometric scan. Her thumb hovered for a beat, then pressed firmly against the screen. The app pulsed once, then opened into a black and gold interface, marked Genesis Access Trustees Only. She didn't say a word. She tapped Stakeholder Verification, entered a 5-digit code, and hit send. Nothing about her demeanor changed. But 10 seconds later, half a deck below them, the operations dashboard at the Regional Flight Management Hub received a red priority ping. The alert appeared in bold red across the interface. Stakeholder 9907L active. Override privileges engaged. Subject Leighton Amara. Trusted entity Easton Strategic Group. Clearance Level 4. Authorized for real-time operational audit. Within 30 seconds, the message duplicated across 5 terminals. A control manager on the ground floor picked up the phone, his voice suddenly sharp. Flight 443, you have a verified stakeholder on board under override access. Cease all crew-led protocol variations immediately. Do you copy? In the cockpit, the first officer turned to the captain, eyes wide. Who's in 2A? The captain flipped the manifest. When he saw the name and the code beside it, his throat tightened. We copy, he replied, picking up the cabin intercom frequency and switching to the command channel. Redirect all security flags to secondary audit protocol. Do not engage passenger in 2A without verified legal representation present. Repeat, do not engage. Meanwhile, Amara pulled out a small, sleek card holder from her coat. Inside it, a black-on-platinum credential rested in velvet lining. A trustee's insignia marked with micro-etched security code and embossed with a signature so rare it triggered facial scans upon presentation. She pressed the corner of the card against the NFC scanner embedded under her seat. A soft green light blinked, confirming authentication. Behind her, a short, nervous attendant noticed the light and stepped toward Malcolm, whispering urgently, "She's got stakeholder access." I saw the scan light up. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "That's not possible." "It is," the attendant whispered back. "It just triggered control alert." Amara looked up from her screen for the first time. Her voice was cool, steady, devoid of volume but saturated with finality. "I suggest you check your headset." Malcolm blinked, then instinctively pressed 2 fingers to the receiver tucked into his collar. The voice on the other end crackled. Code 9907L confirmed. Stakeholder oversight protocol engaged. Effective immediately. Halt all discretionary action against the subject. Pending directive review. Do not initiate further contact until cleared. Malcolm's face paled as the words hit. He nodded once, not to her, but to himself, like a man realizing he had crossed a line so cleanly marked he hadn't noticed it until screamed. In the rear of the plane, a member of the airline's onboard leadership liaison received the same notification. He picked up his secure tablet, entered override credentials, and was greeted with the following line. Current passenger in 2A holds discretionary veto power over all senior personnel structures per Governance Clause 6C under Easton Strategic Holdings. He stood, quietly, urgently. Back in row 2, Amara slipped the card back into its case, not bothering to acknowledge the way the air shifted around her like gravity had reset. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her authority wasn't made of decibels. It was made of silence they now had to answer for. A silence that filed reports in real time. A silence that held more power than any badge Malcolm had ever worn. The whispers died down. The attendants repositioned themselves. Someone in business class stood, looked over the partition, and sat back down without a word. Control had shifted. Not loudly, not violently, but entirely. And Amara simply reached down and powered her laptop back on. Amara sat still in her seat as the atmosphere around her continued to contort in awkward silence, a hushed reverence replacing the passive arrogance that had occupied the air just moments before. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't meet the wide-eyed glances of the crew who now passed by her row with their posture visibly stiffened. Instead, she calmly adjusted the hem of her coat, retrieved her phone again, and opened a different application, a direct line to Genesis Holdings' corporate interface. The screen shifted into a grayscale view marked Stakeholder Communication Hub Tier 1. She tapped into the Employee Liaison portal and scrolled until she located the profile of Kenneth Marlowe, Chief Human Resources Officer at Aerovista Airways. With a swipe, she initiated a direct video call, the camera angled perfectly to capture only her composed, centered frame. When he answered, the background behind him showed a sleek office wall stamped with the company's signature crest, his face shifting from professional neutrality to confused recognition within seconds. "MS. Leighton," he asked, adjusting his collar. "Is this something urgent?" Amara didn't answer immediately. She reached forward, tapped the screen to begin secure recording, and then asked just one question, her tone as calm as still water. "Mr. Marlowe, do you believe I'm a good fit to represent the brand identity of your airline?" Kenneth blinked rapidly, clearly unsure of where the conversation was headed or how much she already knew. I'm not sure I understand the context of your question. Are you referring to sponsorship? Partnership modeling? Advisory?" She didn't blink. She didn't interrupt. She just waited, letting the silence fill the space between them like a courtroom. Kenneth cleared his throat, lowered his eyes briefly, then looked back up. "If this is about your experience on Flight 443, I assure you, I've just been notified. There are protocols in place, but clearly, in this case, those may not have been." She tapped the screen again, ending the recording without another word, and sent it directly to the Internal Audit Division of Genesis, tagging it as Exhibit 4B, Leadership Awareness Evaluation. Without pausing, she opened the stakeholder dashboard once more, drafted a short, encrypted internal memo, and signed it with her authentication key. The subject line read, "Service Environment Review Final Submission." The body of the message was only one line. "I've completed the observational audit on Aerovista's onboard inclusivity infrastructure. The summary is now being distributed to all 3 strategic equity partners, as outlined in the Joint Oversight Agreement." She hit send. The report, already pre-formatted, included timestamps of every incident since boarding. The bypassed greetings, the missed meal, the fabricated random check, the open water bottle, the boarding pass verification hoax, and most importantly, the full transcript of her extraction from the cabin under false security concerns. Each entry was coded with the crew members involved, matched to surveillance audio recorded from the jet's ambient cabin mics. As part of her authority as a Level 4 oversight stakeholder, Amara had access to every operational input connected to her flight, and she had activated a silent observational protocol the moment she was first delayed at check-in. The system hadn't just watched, it had recorded, and now, the entire sequence was being routed simultaneously to Genesis Holdings, Easton Strategic Group, and Brookside Ventures, the 3 firms that collectively controlled over 70% of Aerovista's international expansion capital. Her phone vibrated almost immediately with a reply notification from Easton's Legal Ops. Received. Compliance Review Committee is preparing a call to review for Aerovista's CEO. Estimated turnaround, 3 hours. Recommendation pending. Across the aisle, Malcolm stood near the galley, whispering fiercely into his headset, sweat beading at his collar. One of the junior flight attendants approached him nervously, holding a printout from the onboard tablet. "Sir, we've got a mirrored signal from Central. They're pulling real-time service logs." Malcolm grabbed the paper, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting toward Amara before quickly looking away. A ripple of unrest moved through the front crew as confirmation emails began pinging into their control tablets, standard audit phrases that now read like warning bells. Passenger status reclassified. Oversight entity non-discretionary contact. Flight staff flagged for environmental violation review. Still, Amara didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply leaned back, phone resting on her lap, her body language unreadable except for one thing: she had never intended to punish. This wasn't retaliation. It was revelation, a test they never knew they were taking, in a system they never knew she built. By the time Flight 443 touched down, the fallout had already begun. Amara didn't wait to be escorted off the plane, nor did she demand acknowledgement from the crew, whose smiles had gone rigid with panic. She simply gathered her coat, secured her phone, and exited through the front cabin with the same unshakable poise she had carried onto the aircraft hours earlier. What she didn't need to witness in person had already been set in motion. 43 minutes after her stakeholder verification had been triggered, AeroVista's internal compliance team received a Tier 1 audit alert from Genesis Holdings. An emergency committee had been assembled by video, and by hour 6, a secondary directive had been issued to AeroVista's Board of Operations, requesting the immediate suspension of all employees listed in the Environmental Bias Report. The list included Malcolm, Evan, Rachel from the check-in counter, and 2 senior supervisors stationed at Terminal 7. Each of them received formal notices via their employee portals before their next shifts, alerting them of their temporary leave status and mandating their appearance at an internal ethics review scheduled for the following Monday. The notices weren't harsh. They didn't need to be. They were clinical, exact, phrased in a way that offered no room for misinterpretation. Subject of active bias audit. Removal from high-tier service roles pending investigation. Meanwhile, 3 time zones away, a larger blow struck where it mattered most. Brookside Ventures, one of the airline's key international partners, pulled their funding pledge from a $190 million brand redevelopment initiative focused on luxury route expansion. Their statement was brief, emailed to both Genesis and AeroVista's investor relations team. Due to recent verified stakeholder audit findings, Brookside Ventures is pausing all capital alignment with AeroVista Airways pending demonstrable improvements in equity governance and customer treatment protocols. We do not currently see operational readiness that aligns with our investment values. The message was shared internally but couldn't be contained. Within hours, financial outlets had picked it up, quoting anonymous sources inside both firms. The language wasn't angry. It was clinical, decisive, corporate speak that translated cleanly into consequences. By the 24-hour mark, AeroVista's stock had begun to bleed. It started with a dip, 3%, then spread like cracks across a pane of glass as automated sell orders were triggered by negative investor sentiment. By the time the U.S. markets closed the following afternoon, AeroVista Airways had shed over 12% of its value. Industry analysts on afternoon segments used words like avoidable, systemic oversight, and reputational fragility. Executives scrambled to prepare a response, releasing a general statement that pledged a renewed commitment to fairness and inclusivity, without once referencing the specific event that caused it. But internally, they knew the truth. One woman, with access, clarity, and complete calm, had exposed not a mistake, but a pattern, and that pattern had cost them. Kenneth Marlowe, the CHRO, was the first to be summoned into the emergency session with the board. The message Amara recorded, simple, quiet, lethal in implication, had reached not just HR, but the CEO's direct line. He had played it twice before walking into the meeting. "Do you believe I'm a good fit to represent your airline?" she had asked. Not shouted, not threatened, just asked. And the silence that followed had said more than any scandal ever could. It was the sound of someone caught by their own assumptions. It was the sound of someone watching the truth arrive dressed as accountability. And now, in real time, that accountability was being enforced, not in front of cameras, not in protests, but in memos, balance sheets, and revoked trust. In terminals across the country, subtle changes began to unfold. Employee compliance training sessions were rescheduled. Diversity briefings that had been postponed for months were reinstated with urgent tags. Supervisors were reassigned to temporary domestic rotations, while mid-tier managers were instructed to conduct behavior audits on all first-class interactions from the past 6 months. It wasn't reform, not yet. It was reaction, uncoordinated and incomplete, but it was movement. Not because the airline had chosen to do better, but because someone had shown them exactly how bad they looked when they thought no one was watching. And that someone hadn't yelled. She hadn't filed a lawsuit. She hadn't posted a video. She had simply asked one question, sent one report, and let the system answer for itself. The morning after the market dip, AeroVista's CEO, Richard Hannum, sent a direct message through the encrypted stakeholder channel. The tone was careful, measured, not groveling, but close, worded with the kind of precision reserved for legal landmines disguised as apologies. He began by acknowledging a serious lapse in protocol and culture, and extended a personal invitation to Amara for a private meeting, at a time and place most comfortable to you, to address this matter with the gravity it deserves. The message was long, 4 paragraphs, tied up with language that tried to sound human without admitting liability, sincere without surrendering leverage. Amara read it once. She didn't scroll back. She tapped reply, typed exactly 13 words, and sent it without delay. I don't need an apology. I need your system to stop repeating itself. She didn't sign off with her name. She didn't say sincerely or regards. Just the message. Simple, precise, final. The board saw it within the hour. It circulated quietly among the executive ranks, landing like a verdict no one could appeal. Some said nothing. Others forwarded it to their chiefs of staff with the subject line, "Read this carefully." The audit continued. The restructure advanced. 3 days later, AeroVista issued a press release announcing the formation of a new internal division focused solely on inclusive operations oversight. Language that would have felt progressive if it hadn't been so transparently reactive. They called it the Passenger Equity Initiative. They appointed a director, scheduled quarterly reporting, and promised a seat at the oversight table for stakeholder voices. They didn't mention Amara by name. They didn't need to. At the airport, subtle shifts echoed in the background. Employees began receiving micro-learning modules on unconscious bias. First-class attendants were rotated into retraining simulations. Some balked. Most obeyed. Not because they changed, but because the rules had. Because now, every interaction risked being recorded, escalated, reviewed. The system hadn't reformed, but it had paused, aware now that eyes were watching from the top down. The power structure had been rethreaded from the inside out, and the hands holding the needle had never raised their voice. Amara's return through the terminal was quiet. No red carpet. No cameras. Just the fast-track exit available only to Class A shareholders and executive transport clearances. She moved past the crowd, past the same check-in desks, past the same automated kiosks and velvet-roped lanes where, days ago, her presence had been questioned with every breath. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, a rhythm so steady it cut through the terminal noise without needing to rise above it. And just as she neared the private corridor that led to the executive car pickup, someone saw her. It was Evan, the flight attendant from Flight 443. He was standing near a boarding lane, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking between the gate and a small group of boarding passengers. Then he froze. Just for a second. His eyes caught hers. Recognition sparked, followed quickly by something else, restraint. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something. Maybe a greeting. Maybe an apology. Maybe just a reflex. But he didn't speak. He stopped. Because whatever he'd intended to say couldn't survive the weight of what he now understood. Her presence didn't require acknowledgement anymore. It required respect. And that respect didn't come from fear. It came from the quiet realization that the woman they tried to humiliate now held the power to audit their entire chain of command without lifting a finger. Amara looked at him for half a second. Not long enough to engage. Just long enough to let the silence settle between them as a line too firm to cross. She turned and continued walking, through the final gate, into the private corridor. Past the biometric scanner that lit up green the instant it registered her clearance. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a private car already waiting by the curb. The driver stepped forward with a tablet, checked her name, and silently opened the rear door. Amara stepped in without hesitation, placing her bag beside her, and pulled the door shut behind her with one quiet, final click. As the vehicle eased forward and pulled away from a terminal, the tinted window reflected the letters of the airline's logo shrinking behind her. She didn't look back. There was no need. The message had already landed. The audit had spoken. The system had been seen, not through protests or outrage, but through precision evidence and the unshakable calm of someone who never needed to raise her voice to change the entire narrative. Her phone buzzed once with a secure message. Audit closure confirmed. All protocols executed. Reporting finalized. She locked the screen and leaned back. Outside, the city rolled past, unaware. Inside the system, however, her name would now echo longer than any press headline, policy memo, or training initiative. Because from that moment forward, saying Amara Layton inside any Aero Vista meeting would require a pause. Not in fear, in reckoning. And that was justice. Not loud, just permanent. If this story struck a chord with you, consider subscribing for more narratives that challenge the norms and speak truth through silence. Which moment made you stop and think? Was there a turning point that caught you off guard? And where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective.